Okay, so today on the podcast we have Brian J. Evans. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And we just want to turn the mic over to you, as per usual, for you to give us your short bio.
Great. I would like to consider myself a citizen artist, which is taken from the Aspen Institute for the Arts, an artist that has dedicated their work toward thinking about social justice through the lens of education, healthcare, and a lot of my career has been community outreach based. I'm also a teacher and performer as well. So I create, I perform, I collaborate, I teach what I know, all for the benefit of what I hope art is able to do, which is change the world in a way that allows us to connect more, remind us how connected we actually are. I think our society does a really good job of telling us all the ways in which we're different and the ways that we shouldn't be, going to concerts, dancing with each other, singing with each other, living with each other. And I think art reminds us, from dance to music, to even just being creative with people in a garage, or creative with people in your cubicle. We create together, and that brings us closer. And so if my art can direct people to do that more often and have conversations about that, that is what I love to do.
Great.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your training, how you got started in dance, and what you're doing now.
My training in dance, as a male-bodied person in the dance field, very privileged to get a lot of opportunities to learn on the job. And so I didn't take my first dance class, formal training, until I was 20 as an undergrad at Gustavus Adolphus College. I took Fundamentals of Modern Dance with Maria Tierney. And it was a magical experience. While I was at Gustavus, I was playing football, I was doing choir, I was in choirs, but I never took a dance class. The best thing I knew about dance was my sister was in a lot of recitals, the 3 to 4 hour recitals, doing 20 to 30 different pieces all at once. And not a lot of guys, not a lot of boys in the studio. And so I didn't know really about dance, but I was very embodied. Again, as a sports person, played football throughout my 4 years. And so a lot of that embodiment was already there. It just never really lended itself to an artistic venue. And so I took my first dance class, and my professor, Maria, asked me, after I took the second one, because I really liked it. So I went from fundamentals to beginning, and she just put it on the table for me. She's like, you should think about doing this. And I was like, I should think about doing what? And she's like, dance. And I was like, I didn't know that was something that someone could do.
Wow.
And so in a very naive fashion, I declared a dance major, not really knowing what that meant. And so I had about 3 semesters worth of intense training, which again, Gustavus was a BA program. And so really I had like 1 semester of ballet, 1 semester of jazz, and then I reached to advanced level in modern dance, and then produced my own concert as a senior with a fellow undergrad. And then I got launched out into the world, again, super lucky. One of my professors, Laura Virtucio, who was an adjunct at the time, was in Stuart Pimsleur Dance and Theater, local, or not local, we're both not local anymore, a Minneapolis-based company. And they were looking for a guy. Unbeknownst to me, I auditioned not knowing it was an audition. So they brought me into the studio. I thought I was just having an experience, because that's what professors do. They give us experiences. And after the rehearsal, they offered me a $5 an hour apprenticeship, and that turned into a full company position that following January. And then I just started picking up work. There's not a lot of people in Minneapolis with my skill set that look like me. So there's a combination of a lot of male privilege, a lot of diversity privilege, especially within progressive sectors of the art form. And so I learned quite a lot on the job. Minneapolis is a thriving arts community, a hotbed for all these kinds of collaborations. And so literally working with upwards of 50 to 60 different artistic directors over a span of 11, 12 years has cobbled together this very interesting, versatile skill set that I have, which lent itself to teaching. And that's where I think I've learned the most about this craft, is being a teacher and trying to teach the things that I think I know how to do to folks that are really interested and engaged. And then we learn together how best to keep on doing the thing. So a lot of my training has been on the job, and just meeting wonderful people that want to make work, and me trying to support and bring what I have to the table.
Wow.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, well, it sounds like you were really involved with football. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
So what was that like, the transition from football into dance? Were you really sad about that? Were you ready for a change?
Was I sad about the transition? This is a sort of a less known story of mine. But so when I was a senior at Gustavus, so again, I played all 4 years and got to the point, and again, you know, this is wrapped up with diversity, it's wrapped up with putting best foot forward, but they actually put me up on a billboard. You know, those like glamour shots where I'm like holding the Heisman sort of pose in one of the games. And little fun fact, my grandpa knew the guy who put up the billboard, and so like after they took it down, he got it and put it up on my mom's garage. It's a very strange.
That's amazing.
Strange thing. Anyway, so I'm playing football. I found dance as a sophomore, kept on dancing, and so I was this dance major on this football team, and the embodiment thing, especially with modern dance, because it's all about being on the floor, being in the earth, I guess, and football is an extension of that, you know, taking people to the earth, you know, sometimes violently, and, and and also what was a really interesting thing is when I was a senior, I got what was called the Sportsmanship Award, which was voted on players, coaches, and refs. And apparently in the MIAC, I was the nicest player on the field. And again, that paired with dance, it just made sense that the embodiment that I was interested in really was about artistic expression and bringing people together, rather than competing all the time for competing. And I was sent a letter from the National Football League inviting me to the combine, and I took about 2 weeks to decide if I was going to start my $5 an hour apprenticeship in Minneapolis or go on an audition for the National Football League. And I took the $5 an hour apprenticeship. And I think it's turned out really well.
I'd say.
But it was an extremely humbling situation and a crossroads that, again, I'm very thankful for the choice that I made. But it's, again, as someone that lives in the body that I live in, it's an interesting, the measures of success are really hard to manage as an artist, because there are only so many venues that people who are not in the arts field can recognize as though you've made it. I can't tell you how many times I've come off the stage and people, you know, well-intended, have been like, you should go to Broadway, or you should go to Dancing with the Stars, or you should be on these shows that, again, showcase the arts in a really heightening way. You know, we all have issues and problems with how we present ourselves, but for the most part, more people know about dance than they did 10, 15 years ago.
True.
But given that the people who are doing the craft are also then pigeonholed of like, so what does success look like? And so, you know, having this back and forth of like, even going to that NFL, even going to the combine would have lauded some sort of prestige, as opposed to a $5 apprenticeship that may or may not have resulted in anything. And I think what artists by and large do and are trained to do is to take those kinds of risks, to sort of take those artistic risks and rely on the community and find success within within the form, within the expression, within the momentary glimpse of joy that happens on stage, when we know that it's temporal and it's fleeting and it's only going to last for that moment. But I think we live for those kinds of moments, and if those kinds of moments can again help people, bring us together, then it's all worth it. So for me, it was less of a sadness as more of a realization that what I wanted to do with my life had more to do with finding out what art could do, rather than trying to pursue something that already had been established as that success, and you definitely will be viewed as so if you do this thing. I do miss the camaraderie. I do miss competitiveness, like healthy competitiveness. Not all sports are healthy, but there is something to be said about, here are a set of rules, here's an embodiment arena, and go for it.
Yeah.
And then after the game is done, you shake everybody's hand. Again, sportsmanship award. Thank you so much. And so I didn't like dislike anyone that I played against. And unfortunately, it doesn't really happen as much in the arts field. It seems like we're pitted against each other because we don't have enough resources, and it's a whole other can of worms. But it's a lovely thing to compete in a healthy way, and so there's that camaraderie that I miss, that I don't necessarily always feel in the dance world, unless you find that community. If you're lucky enough to find that community.
Yeah, I have one more question, and then I'll let D talk. You talk about, well, the decision between those two options were obviously a jump off a cliff, I would say. And have you found yourself in that kind of predicament in the dance world specifically again?
Yeah, I mean, several times. I think it's, so financially, it's really hard to support oneself, right? And so I think the Star Tribune, which is another local newspaper, not local, Minneapolis-based newspaper, Minneapolis, St. Paul, I think they came out with a study that it was like $11,000 is what a typical average dancer will make in Minnesota, and $11,000 is nothing. $11,000 doesn't get you a house, doesn't get you an apartment, doesn't barely get you food if you live off of that. And in so many ways, it's kind of like a stipend if you get paid, and there's so many dancers that don't. So the cliffs really for me have been more financial. Do I take this more lucrative position either in teaching or theater, or completely leave the arts sector and go to another field, because I know, like, absolute certainty it's more financially sustainable, and that's the disparity. It's not like and you know, and I'm in rarefied air right now as someone that is going to be having a tenure track position. Like, it's the 1% of the 1% in terms of our field who can do their art and make a livable wage, and a livable wage with benefits. Like, oh my gosh, 1% of 1% of 1%. And so those cliffs or those diversions have really been about, do I stay and commit to the field and eventually try to work my way into a position where I'm financially stable? Is that even possible? What choices do I need to make to do that, and then also knowing that when I do reach that place, who else didn't get that job? Who is, you know, how many times have I gotten a job because of just who I look like, the person that I embody, where thousands and thousands of way more qualified dancers in terms of technique, in terms of what they've put into the field, have gotten. And that's the, I think that's the real tension that revolves around the arts, is that we're such a underappreciated form, and no one really understands that a freelance artist, just like an independent contractor, is their own, you know, accountant, they're their own administrative person, they're their own everything. They're their own 401k contributor, you know, they're their own like there's no one really supporting us. And so it's like those choices of like, I know if I make this choice, I'll be financially stable, but what if I stay here and hold on to that? And do I have the resolve, and do I have the privilege and the opportunity to even consider that? And that's something that I really try to advocate for myself, like trying to stick with it as best I can. But yeah, those cliffs, those decisions come more than I would like, because it questions my it's a very existential question, like, what am I here to do in this life? And I've had the privilege and the honor to really try to stick with this arts thing, until, you know, and right now it's paid off, but it's been a journey for sure, and a lot of people don't even get near to where I've been. So it's both a tension, but also an honor to sort of be a flag bearer of what the arts can do.
Yeah. Can I ask you, what do you think the country can do to support artists or freelance artists?
Yeah. It's been really interesting, again, along with what's going on with COVID-19, and that it's the first time in my recollection that unemployment benefits have been extended to independent artists, to gig economy artists, or gig economy people. And really, that's just a function of the collective attention brought within our society that these kinds of folks are really important to the sort of connective tissue that I think holds us all together, especially in times of crisis. And I'm not really like a long-term planner, but if I was, wouldn't it be interesting if there was a Department of Arts and Culture, you know, a department within federal, state, local governments, you know, again, all through, because I am someone that appreciates local involvement and local strategies. And in some ways it you know, because another example or metaphor would be, you know, dancers and union houses. Dancers don't have unions. And so when we're in a union house and we have to follow all of these rules, we really see the disparity of the fact that there are folks within the arts that are essentially subsidized, yes, by a union, yes, by people providing dues, but there's a collective action or agency that comes with helping everyone involved. And one size doesn't fit all, but it would be an interesting conversation, to not always be, to not have all the funding threatened every election cycle, and to just sort of come to terms with the idea that artists and people who educate students and adults who want to learn more about embodying their own being, to be more in touch with their body, to be more to allow their communication to resonate far beyond what they say, but like how they act and how they interact with people, that is something that is valuable. And that's valuable in all sectors. That's valuable in all walks of life. The more creative that you can be means the more resilient you are in all aspects, the more diversified you can be in all aspects. And when you are confronted with new information that doesn't necessarily jive with your belief system, that you're able to take that in and really work with it and embody it, as opposed to shutting down and being rigid against that. And I think that's what arts do, indirectly. There's a lot of research that supports that, but regardless of the research, how many times have I been in a community workshop where a whole bunch of strangers don't want to talk to each other, and then 2 hours later they're hugging each other and lifting everybody up, and like literally lifting people up in the room. And they may never see those people ever again, but they then have an experience where in 2 hours a stranger turned into a friend, and or again they were reminded that the stranger was a friend to begin with. And I think that's like, if as a society we could all just agree that that's very important and very valuable. Again, value as trying to rub up against, you know, capitalism, and again the idea that we can, that all of these things are important, but if one supersedes the other and they don't support each other, then it's hard to really get anywhere. So that would be my answer to that. It's a very long one, and that's probably why it hasn't gotten done yet.
That's a great answer. Can you talk about Seattle and what you've been doing in Seattle?
Certainly. So I moved to Seattle in 2018 to pursue an MFA, Master of Fine Arts in dance at the University of Washington. The University of Washington has a very unique program, and it's really geared. It's sort of the only one I've found within the country that is geared toward taking mid-career artists and transforming them into professors, and enhancing their craft to be legible in academia. And so again, that was another sort of like leap. I found myself being surrounded by amazing teachers and colleagues in Minnesota who were not eligible for these kinds of financially sustainable gigs, like being a professor at a college or a university, because they didn't have their terminating degree, which is the MFA. And as a 30-something, I just felt like if I had the ability to, that I should probably try to get that, so that I had options. So I wasn't, as a 50, 60, 70-year-old practitioner, being told that I can't teach because I didn't have a piece of paper. And this program has shown that it's very much more than a piece of paper. And again, regardless, or not in regards to other programs, you know, varying degrees of what they focus on. But again, we're just saying, like, we value education, and we value that whoever does have an MFA can back up their experience by being a better teacher, human, artist. And I feel like that's what's happened to me in Seattle. I really wanted an opportunity to take everything I've learned in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the greater Minnesota area, being with all of those companies, again, primarily Stuart Pimsleur Dance and Theater, who I was with the entirety of my career in Minnesota, that I could take all of those skills and show up in a brand new place and see if people liked it, or see if it was effective. And it really has been. I feel like, as a Minnesota-based artist, as someone that really takes on the mantle of being a Minnesota artist, it has really shown up in big ways. And I'm pushing myself in so many different ways. I'm trying to understand my mixedness, and I'm trying to understand where that lies politically. I'm trying to understand where activist dance lives in my body. I'm trying to again, be legible within academic circles, and to be one of those champions within academia that then can extend out into the rest of the community to, again, legitimize dance and legitimize art, so that it's not a question anymore about whether or not it's effective or is valuable. It is effective and valuable, but we need to be able to talk about it. and we need to encourage dancers who aren't usually asked to speak, to voice why it's important and why they do what they do and why they are constantly tearing their bodies apart to reach that perfect position in space, in time, with music,
Yeah.
with lights in our eyes and costumes that don't ever fit. It's like, this is important. And so that's what I'm really trying to unpack for myself here during this time of learning. It's also a very unique time to have had about an 11-12 year career, and then to be in a space where I am challenged and tasked to learn and to read and to write and to teach all at the same time. So I'm creating, I'm performing, I'm teaching all of these ideas that are being processed, and I'm embodying it in all of these different ways. And that doesn't happen very often when you're a freelancer, because I might have 5 or 6 jobs in a day, and something really good might have happened in the morning, but I don't have any time to really process that or write a paper about it or give a presentation on it, because I have the next day, which is another 6 things, which are all very different and have nothing to do with Monday. It's Tuesday today, and I have a job to do, and if I don't do that job, I don't keep my reputation up. I don't allow the people that I'm interacting with to experience the fullness of themselves, and I certainly don't get any money. And so to be in a institution that is about that kind of journey, it's also a unique program because tuition is waived, and because I'm an employee for the University of Washington as a teacher, I'm getting a living stipend. And because there's a really strong TA and grad union at the University of Washington, the pay, it's not livable, but it's way more than it was, I think, even like 5-10 years ago. So I'm getting somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,700 before taxes a month. Which again, if I was in Minneapolis, that would be great.
Yeah.
In Seattle, that's not as great, because my 1-bedroom apartment is $2,200 a month. So that's to put that in perspective. I have $500 left after I pay my rent to do stuff.
No.
So yeah, that's what I'm doing here. I'm surviving as an artist. I'm teaching as a grad student. I'm learning and growing as a human. And then that has dismounted into a tenure track professorship at Bates College, which starts in August. And so I'm, went from Minneapolis to Seattle, and now moving all the way across the country to Lewiston, Maine, to continue the journey and promote the arts.
Congratulations on your new job. That's really exciting.
Thank you. It's the first time that I'll have a job in the arts that pays me a livable wage. I don't even know really what to do with myself yet. I haven't really thought about what that means, and I haven't really. I'm like crossing my fingers until I get that very first paycheck. Otherwise, it's not real.
That's how I think.
Exactly.
So people probably don't know you're also in theater and you're a musician. Talk about, I don't know how you got into that. How did you start that? Did you start that at a younger age, or what happened?
Yeah. So music has always been a part of my family. Very musical family. My grandma and grandpa were in choirs, and my mom plays piano and was also in choirs. And so music has always been around. And again, when I moved to Minnesota, so I was in Cleveland for the first 7 years of my life. And then in 1992, 93, we moved to Minnesota. And that really just changed a lot of my upbringing and opportunities in life, to move from an urban setting to a rural setting. And again, the more I've learned about, social justice, the more I've come to understand what opportunities come from moving from a predominantly marginalized community to a predominantly privileged community, and to be treated like any other kid, especially because my grandfather was a postmaster of this really small town of 2,200 people. I wasn't just some kid of color down the street. I was John's grandson. And that made all the difference in a town where small towns are really beautiful and great because they really look after their own. But if you're not one of their own, then it can be really difficult and really hard to make it. So we had a very large migrant population that moved in our small town, and a lot of the racism went toward them and not so much at me. And so I, as a 7-year-old, was like this carefree little dude named Brian, and the first theater role I ever took on was Toto in The Wizard of Oz. I was great. I had 4 lines. I could bark, I could howl, I could whine, and I could growl. And I really liked the growling part.
Can you give us a demo?
So I love that because it was the first time in my life that literally, like, I was Brian off stage, and then I was Toto the dog on stage. And as a 7-year-old, to be allowed to imagine being Toto in The Wizard of Oz, and to realize that I could be anything I wanted to be on stage, and that was allowed. That's huge. That's huge. You know, there is the mantra of like, you can be anything you want to be, but as we grow older, we realize that that's probably not true, or that's probably much harder than is a statement on a poster. There are things that I am not allowed to do. There are things that it doesn't matter how hard I work, I'm not going to be able to get to those places or see those things or be invited, to say the least. And so I had these parallel tracks of like being from 7 to 18, being in my small town and being known as Brian, allowed for me to just learn free from some of my other colleagues who were taught like, yeah, you can do anything that you want, but you have to work 10 times as hard. Or you can do anything that you want, but you're not going to get paid the same as somebody else, even though you're doing the same job. Or you can do anything that you want, except that, you know, there have been laws placed on the books that if you try to do this, you're going to go to jail. And so the best thing that happened to me in my upbringing was that I was able to do theater, music, and then as I got into college, learned how to embody all of that. Because when I got to college, then I started learning like, oh no, like nobody knows that I'm Brian from Gaylord, Minnesota, outside of my small town of Gaylord, Minnesota. Nobody knows that my grandfather's a postmaster. Nobody knows that I'm a good kid. Nobody knows that that I'm not scary, or that I'm dangerous. But when I walk down the streets of Minneapolis and people cross the street, or when I'm in the lobby before a show and nobody wants to talk to me, and then after the show everybody wants to talk to me, it has allowed me to take the skills that I've learned on stage and apply them to the rest of my life, and that has made all the difference. Because when I confront someone, or when I am confronted with someone that doesn't really appreciate me being alive, for whatever reason, I'm able to take that on as more of an intellectual puzzle, because I know that the story that they have of me is probably not true, and they just need to see me and other people like me who I represent in another context, like the stage or like an education setting. There have been many instances, because my name is Brian, which is a racially ambiguous name, maybe more leaning toward it not being a person of color. And I'll show up in spaces and they weren't expecting me, they're expecting Brian. And, again, there isn't anything inherently bad about the person who's expecting whatever it is they're expecting. but it is important that we can then have those conversations and realize that it's all made up. All the stories that we have are combinations of experience and what we've been told and the exposure that we have to people. We were in New York Mills in greater Minnesota, which is like a town of 1,700 people, I think, which I'm very comfortable in, super comfortable in a small town in Minnesota. But Stuart Pimsleur Dance and Theater, like, we're an intergenerational, multiracial company, and we walk into this diner and it's like the diversity level just skyrockets in the entire town. And this gentleman came up and he was so jazzed about a dance company being in his small town, except that he only expressed that to my colleague Scott, the only white male at the table. And I'm sitting right next to him, and this gentleman, again, so affable and well-meaning, but he was like, it's so great that these students can see Black people, because it must be a shock and a half. And and in my body, I'm like, okay, I can sense his intention. It is to be so thankful and grateful, except that the way he embodied that is to turn to the person that he recognized as safe and as someone that he could relate to and talk to, which makes so much sense. But in my experience, if I wasn't able to have the skills to like absorb that and not be offended or not be taken aback, or to once again be vulnerable enough to accept the fact that this person has never been given the skills to do this kind of work, it just makes my day that much worse. However, that's a lot of work that I have to do that most people don't know that I'm doing. And if I were to get upset, some would say that that's valid because of what just happened. But I, again, would rely on my experience with the arts, that the reason I'm able to sit in those moments and really try to see the person who is saying those things is because I was given an opportunity well early in my life that helped me realize that there's so many stories that I can live out and play out. And if someone tells me to be something or has predetermined me to be something, that I don't necessarily have to take on that story as my own. And that's something that most people, I don't believe, get in their life, because they're constantly told that they're one thing. Yep. And, for better or worse, some people are told that they're one thing and that one thing is the best thing. And so they believe that they're the best thing, and others are told that they're not the best thing, or they're the second best thing, or the third best thing, or they would be the best thing if they do this thing, and if you believe that story, it really cuts down your options and what you can do, and what you can be and what you can accomplish. And so I think the arts, again, is such a resilient place to learn those skills. For better or for worse, it allows us to really to be happy, to live, to find the joy in moments of crisis, and to take on challenge and
Yeah.
figure out a way.
Yeah. Can you talk about dance activism? I don't know much about that, and this seems like it could be related to what you were talking about.
Yeah, it's the course that I'm teaching is called Dancing Activism, and it's really just like trying to allow students or empower students to have their own living definition of what activist dance is and what it looks like, and how they might want to produce such works. It's a little counterintuitive because activism, as presented within academia, can be pretty watered down. You learn all the facts and you learn the bullet points of things, but for those who were there at that time, or there in that concert, or witnessed that piece, it changed their life. And there are all forms and shapes of dance, especially within concert dance, and they all have their their place within the form. And I really I want student artists to really know whether or not they're attempting to make an activist work or not, and what kind of biases do they have in receiving those kinds of work. And again, what was considered activist 20 years ago is probably not activist anymore, but it's because it was activist at that time. It's now allowed us to get to a place where, you know, we see other pieces about that content. And we're like, oh, you know, that's just that next piece about that stuff. And it's been really eye-opening, at least for me, because, you know, modern dance at its inception was the most activist, rebellious thing ever.
Yeah.
Especially within academia, and to have anything to counter ballet in the world of concert dance was obscene, you know, like people taking their shoes off, you know, very much in line with the feminist movement. It's like, you're burning ballet shoes, you're burning your bras. It's like it's anarchy. And the idea that a dance form could embody activism. And then again, 80 years later, you know, within academia, students are craving for something different or something more, or to really, again, understand why ballet and modern are so prolific in academia and other dance forms aren't. And that's a function of again, systems, and a function of how that oral tradition, or how those stories get translated, and how they're lost over time. And again, you know, like modern dance having a resurgence in the 20s and 30s, and yet we think about indigenous peoples who've always danced, always, and how all cultures have forms of dance. And it doesn't matter if we call it modern, or we call it postmodern, or we call it ballet, or we call it folk dance, or folklorica. It doesn't matter. It's all coming from humans. And even existing in the traditions that we have is a form of activism, if we choose to look at it that way. Just as a form of resistance. It's like you doing your Croatian dance at home with your grandma could be just as activist as someone making, you know, a piece at the Kennedy Center about LGBTQIA rights, or the patriarchy, or capitalism, or whatever. But because our society doesn't think about the Croatian folk dance as activists, we lose that connection to what does it mean to be a dancer? What does it mean to be a mover? And that's what the course is about. It progresses through several social justice lensing, from dancing as resistance, dancing race, dancing feminism, dancing LGBTQIA+, dancing politics, dancing climate change. And then the student artists at the end of it have an opportunity to make a piece. Again, it's delimited by the fact that we're all going to have to do it in Zoom, and or video digital format. But that's part of it too, right? In crisis, some of the first things to go are the arts. And that's usually the first things that are needed to be, you know, super creative about the solutions, and to challenge our society in a moment that we are being so challenged to consider alternatives, and to be better, to be more prepared, to put us through the crucible of our lives, and to come out the other side, you know, forged and resilience. And that's the hope for this particular class. And it's really just helped me get through this time, preparing for these lectures, and seeing these students have these beautiful aha moments about their assumptions and their beliefs, and to really, like, we've been discussing it, like holding your beliefs in one hand, but leaving your other hand as open as possible for new information, so that you can really, you know, and then do the work of like this, like embodying what happens. And then you come to the table again with your beliefs with an open hand, and then you have to do the work of embodying it again. And that's been a really great metaphor for us.
In your class, are you going to, do you have any conservative principles in your class, or are they all left-leaning?
Can you define left-leaning and conservative
Mhm.
for me?
So I would say everything you mentioned, like LGBTQIAP plus feminism, all those things are more left-leaning, and conservative being more pro-life, male-woman marriage, and all the rest like that. Um, I guess how would you deal with a conservative student in your class?
How would I deal with them? I think
Well, I wouldn't say. I mean, to put it out there, D and I are more conservative leaning. Um, and what would happen if I wanted to make a piece about being pro-life?
Mhm. Again, I think that's the beauty, for me at least, that's the beauty of what arts can do. And I may be on the fringe of this. I don't think I am, but I believe that the arts is one of the last places that we can have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
And for me to dictate to anyone that they can't make a piece about something that they want to make a piece about, that doesn't make any sense to me. I think within this class, another thing that we really think about is feedback and how to, again, understand your biases when you see something,
Mhm.
and to come with to any experience as fully embodied as possible, and again, to know what you believe, but to understand that you need to have you don't need to do anything. Nobody needs to do anything. But in this class, what I'm trying to get folks to understand is that if you don't come with this kind of metaphor, then other people who aren't doing this work, you need to understand that that's what they're coming with too.
Right.
And the idea that I think the idea that art can't be a space for those things to happen means that we lose something in our society and in our life. So again, like you can make any work that you want to, and then when you do the work of understanding where it sits within the political spectrum, to then know what the potential criticism might be, or what audience you're going for, and when you're getting feedback from certain people, another mantra that we're using is that all feedback is valid, but not all feedback is useful. And so the feedback that you're getting at this point in time might not be useful right now. It could be useful 10 years from now. And we know, again, throughout history, what is progressive now can be conservative later. What is conservative now can be progressive later. We that is just how that's just how history works. Prohibition was all the rage, and then we're like, nah, probably not. We like to drink. So there are moments in time and moments in history that that the artists need art to try to help unpack. I think they need art to try to help unpack, because if we're not having these conversations, then ultimately what then ends up happening, just like within race, is like I paint you with a conservative brush, and I feel then I can never get anything out of my relationship with you. And you paint me with the left-leaning label, and then we don't sit down and have a conversation about the fact that I've been in spaces with both of you, and I've embodied in spaces with both of you, and that is, for me, is more important. That relationship is more important than the labels, because I'm bombarded with labels constantly. And again, my experience as an artist has allowed me to receive those labels, unpack them, and to move forward, knowing that there are people in this world that would rather me not exist. Like they would rather me die right now, and for me to stop everything that I contribute to the world. And there are a lot of people that want me to keep on promoting what I'm doing in the world. And with that tension comes a beautiful place to make some art about how that is insane, how I know, at least I believe, that if I had an opportunity to sit down with this person and us recognize how much we have in common, and how, yeah, we disagree on how life needs to be lived, and we might have some extreme, like we're dealing with extreme instances of morality and mortality and life and death, and I just don't see those conversations happening in a productive way in other venues, except for when we make an art piece, and then you can tear apart an art piece. That's what it's for. You can like hate it and wish it never was made, but it's about the art as opposed to the person, because the person, whatever they made, that's just one aspect of them, or that's just one version of what they were able to put out with the people that they were able to work with and in that time, and they're trying to work through some stuff. Now, not everybody's doing that. Some people are making art to shut down arguments, but I think more often than not, as soon as you make something, it's not yours anymore, and then we're able to really talk at and break apart the art piece, which then allows us to talk with each other rather than at each other. And I think that's a better world to be in. At least it leaves us open to have these kinds of conversations rather than you not inviting me on the show or me not accepting the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And just a little caveat, I said earlier that about the marriage with men and women, we're more libertarian. We don't care what you do as long as you're not punching us in the face. So we're more of that. Just to put that out there. But yeah, I agree with that.
So we worked together, and I look back on that experience with such joy because I felt like I was the choreographer in the situation, and you really helped facilitate and validate my vision for what I wanted the piece to become. And I just remember how special that was and how amazing you are at helping people realize what they want to make and how to make that more clear. And can you talk about how you became good at that?
Well, I appreciate that feedback. I think I've just always been really curious about, why folks want to make what they want to make, and to just ask a lot of questions, and a lot of it just has to do with the function of like, so if I'm going to do something, if I'm going to perform something, I really want to believe in whatever it is that I'm doing. And I really want to understand the reasons behind it, so that when I'm on stage, I'm presenting, again, the fullest expression of whatever it is that I'm trying to express. And because the way that I process art and the way that I feel when I'm on stage, I can be anything and everything, that I literally can be anything and everything. And I can show up in a way that is authentic to myself, but also authentic to whatever role that I'm playing. And so I think it's just, me just constantly doing that in every process that I've been in, and noting what questions help folks, noting what questions tend to shut down conversations and what opens them up, to again ask in a very authentic way. There's sometimes you can ask a question and you already know the answer, and you want that person to have the answer that you have. And that's usually not a good feeling for anybody. And so it's like asking a question and really being interested about what the answer could be. Yep. And then like dreamstorming up all the options. And that's what I love to do as a collaborator, is just to like, here are all the options, and then to have someone stand in the midst of all those options and feel confident that whatever one they choose, I'm going to totally support. And then once we sort of like, that happens once or twice or three times, and then, you know, you as the choreographer, as the choice maker, is emboldened by the again, not like a cheerleader for cheerleader's sake, but like this, the fact that like someone's in the room and really wants to hear and understand what you want. It's again such a validating process. It doesn't happen very often, because we don't get a lot of opportunities to be in charge of stuff. We're usually like at the whim of other systems and other things. And so like we're literally carving out a rarefied space of reality where you are totally in charge of the reality we're about to present. And I am invited into the process in a way that allows me to live in that reality. So it makes total sense that, you know, there's someone playing guitar in the corner, and that there's grapefruits and blindfolds and, you know, contact improv and modern and text on stage, and all of that makes sense because we were very clear about the reality we wanted to set up. And the audience has the tradition of like coming to a theater space and just believing and trusting in whatever it is they see, if it's authentic and presented that way. And I, again, like as someone that wants to be able to do that off the stage, and believes that we can do that off the stage, the stage is where I hope to help myself and other people refine those skills. So when they go off the stage, they can just do that same thing. You know, there's way more barriers to do that, but you at least have had an opportunity to do it that one time in that one space. And that, I think that's just such an empowering thing. So, and if I can empower everyone, I would love to do that. And so it's an honor and a privilege to be in a process with people. And and our process was fantastic. I loved every bit of it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was, I look back on it fondly. Can you talk about when you make your own work, how that translates, and with you working by yourself, not with other people, how does that translate? How do you use those same principles to make your own vision come to life?
Gosh, it's a lot harder, it feels like, especially when you're by yourself trying to make something, or you're the one in charge. Like, you have to make the decision, which means that you're accountable for the choices that you make. And you know, I think in a very lucid kind of way, I have many conversations with myself, with the many versions of myself that I've come to understand. And you know, and the sort of downside of reality is that you can only sort of be the one thing at one point, but in your mind and in the art that you can make, you can really see yourself from so many different angles and see yourself represented in so many different ways, and all the choices that you could have made and would have made but didn't because you didn't have the information, or you were too scared, or and that happens in art, except that you're given all of these really tried and trusted tools like lights and costumes and proscenium stage presentations and theater in the round, and there's all of these resources at your disposal that you can fall back on, you know, like the rule of three, and like, you just know that the rule of three works, and you know, breaking the fourth wall, you know, when that's done at a certain time in a certain place, it works. It really like brings people in, and you can go to them. So for me, making my own work, like the last work I made was called Crazy, and it was for an institution called CD Forum Performing Arts and Ideas, which is in the Central District of Seattle, which is a predominantly Black neighborhood. And I performed it at the Langston Hughes Performing Arts Center Institute. And And I did this like postmodern thing. I ran in place for 10 minutes. And it was like a fever dream. Like I had this opportunity to perform, and I like came up with the idea, and then I was like, oh no, I have to run in place for 10 minutes now. And and so then, you know, it's like, again, like the access to postmodern movement, and you know, who started postmodern movement, and you know, that arena of art that is highly intellectualized and doesn't always make sense unless you know what they're doing, or what they're referencing. And sometimes those creators of those works don't even find it necessary to give you that information. And it's kind of like, if you don't have that information, then you're kind of out of luck. And again, I think there's a place for that art, but for me, it's very frustrating to watch that kind of art when I don't know why they're making that choice. And so I decided to run in place. And the first third of it was me talking to the audience, explaining exactly what I was doing, but trying to do that in a very funny way. So, you know, like the opening line is like, I'm running in place, and just imagine I'm running in place. I have a hoodie on and like athletic gear. Like, I know what you're thinking. Well, at least I know what I'm thinking. Oh my God, not another durational piece. And then I proceed to just like deconstruct what I'm doing, to finally be saying, like, the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to need your help. I can't run in place for 10 minutes. This is ridiculous. And so anything that you can do, please. And then I put a slow track of CeeLo singing the song Crazy, but it's super slowed down, and it's beautiful. And it's got a tempo that I can just run to. And the place in varying iterations went nuts. They were cheering for me throughout the last 7 minutes of the piece. Some people came down on stage and started running with me. Some people got up in their seats and ran with me. And while I was running, I was taking off clothing to reveal different costumes and iterations. So I'm in an athletic gear. I take off the first costume. I'm in a suit, jacket, and a tie. I take that off. I'm in a sport jacket, like a model shoot. I take that off. I'm in a jumper, and then I take that off, and I have this huge 20-foot cape that just blows behind me.
Where'd you get that?
I made a piece last year at the University of Washington.
The more important question.
The more important question is the cape.
Oh, how did it fit?
I had this jumpsuit, and I literally shoved all that fabric into my pants.
Oh my God.
So the last image,
you lost weight during the
you're dang right. So the last image is me like running in place as like a superhero. I'm like in my underwear, and my cape is flying behind me, and the crowd is just, it was great.
Wow.
But when I think about that piece, and when I thought about it before I did it, I had no idea it was going to work. I had no idea if anyone was going to come along with me on this running thing, if what I was going to say would be an invitation. I had no idea if people were going to interact with me. I had no idea.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's the risk you take, making art. And there was so much imagery involved in that piece. And there's no way that I could understand all of it. And the best part of doing that piece was the feedback that I got afterwards, and everyone's different take and everyone's different journey. Because again, not everybody is embodied the way that I am, and not everybody sees life the way that I do. And so they're watching me as the art form, going through an experience, and it brings up a whole bunch of stories for them, and it has them question why they think those stories, and then they get a chance to talk to me about them and see if their stories are real or true. And I always am just like, yeah, that story is definitely true for you in this time, in this space, and hopefully seeing the piece has added another story for you to think about. And and not all artists do this because it can get exhausting, but I very much like getting feedback at any stages of the process. And I do not believe that the piece starts and ends with lights up, lights down. I think it starts well before the pieces are presented. And like any good art should last your entire lifetime. You know, there are definitely moments in my life that I flash back to the piece that we made, Dee, and at the time, that thing that I did meant one thing, and then again in this other context, I'm like, holy cow, that makes so much more sense to me in this particular setting. Um,
Yeah.
and not more sense in a good or bad way. It's just more sense for me right now, and I was able to use that experience. And that's again that's my hope with all the art that I make, whether it's dance, whether it's music. So I've been a singer-songwriter for maybe 10 years now, and I've been writing under the moniker of Moments of Suspension, which is my way of thinking about the songs that I make and really taking a moment in my life and then unpacking it with music. And every concert that I do, I'm like, you know, I write the lyrics that I write because they make sense to me. But if the song takes you to another story, you should go to that story, because that's the whole point. The music that I create in that moment is the moment that is important to me, but the feeling of that moment, the essence of that moment is universal, because I'm human and we're all humans, and we all have these feelings of being alone or being forgotten or being lifted up or wanting to succeed, or, you know, it's like they're the same moment except the context or the details are different, and the characters are different, but it's all the same feeling, I think. And the details are important for sure, but I think the feeling is more important.
Yeah, I think what's really important about that piece that you made is you took it 2 steps up from what I would consider like a basic postmodern dance. Like running in place for 10 minutes, that sounds like hell to me to watch.
You would hate that.
I would hate it. I would hate it. But what you did seems really interesting, and I would love to see that.
Yeah, me too.
For sure. Well, you know, if we're both out in New England and you want to bring me down to do that piece, I'd be happy to perform it.
Oh my gosh, yes.
That would be cool. That would be.
And Jordan can make a really good video of it.
Oh yeah.
That would be
cool videos.
That'd be definitely cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, do you see yourself going back to Minneapolis? I know you're going to Maine, and that could be for a long time. But do you see yourself returning to Minneapolis at some point?
Returning to Minneapolis as like a teacher, mover, dancer, mainstay. You know, I don't know. I think the way that I've sort of structured my life, again, for better or for worse, is that the work is really taking me to different places. The tenure track process is a 7-year process, and tenure track positions are becoming less and less of a option for professors and for teachers, because you know, tenure tracks, it's a function of funding and a function of, again, the importance of arts in academic institutions, and I, you know, I have no idea if I'll even like being a professor. I think I will, but I know that there's way more to being a professor than working with students and making work. You know, there's bureaucracy that has to be waded through, and there's you know, everyone has an ego when it comes to their art because they think it's important, and that it's important to think your art is important, but to what extent does that fly within academia? So there's a freedom that I felt in Minneapolis, and again, a robustness that I think is, you know, usually is overlooked in terms of being in the Midwest and us feeling like we're in flyover country, or other people feeling like we're in flyover country. But I am unabashedly taking Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the greater Minnesota area with me as an artist. And I am constantly telling people that I am a Minnesota artist, and I am, that is how my career has been built, and the people that have, you know, allowed me to be, helped me be the person that I am, forged me into the artist that I am, is important. And so who knows what happens in 7 years if I do become tenured at Bates College. Again, it's hard to move that tenure to other places. But if I do come back to Minneapolis or St. Paul, I wouldn't be mad at it. I think it's a brilliant place to, especially for thriving artists, to sort of get their feet wet and to really have so many opportunities. Again, it's not, my experience is not typical, but I think in comparison to a Chicago or a New York or San Francisco or even a Seattle, the Seattle dance scene is diverse and thriving, but it is completely underfunded. There's no funding in the Seattle area for artists. There's 2 mainstream dance companies that can pay artists a somewhat livable wage, but again, it's Seattle, and Seattle has Boeing and Starbucks and Microsoft and Amazon, and it's just the price of living is it's hard. It's hard. There's huge homeless population. Everyone's getting priced out and moved out of their spaces. So I think the biggest question for the arts and for my artistic career is how to be sustainable, and then if I am sustainable, how to be accountable to the communities that got me there. I'm very enthusiastic about a civic engagement program that Bates has within the community, so I'm really excited about being available to engage in a new community and to bring more people into this field and into their bodies. And I wish there were more of me to experience other communities.
Me too.
And I wish, there's also like the idea of wanting to have some time internationally, so that I, have an understanding of how, again, my context of the world is pretty myopic in that it's US based for the most part. And so I'm very curious to see what, if any, experiences I have for a prolonged period of time outside of the US. But again, who knows what will happen. But yeah, I think that is a very long answer to say I don't know. So I could have just said I don't know.
I wish I could talk that long for an I don't know answer.
That's why we have you on, Brand.
Oh my gosh, this has been awesome. We have one more question though. What impact is your goal for, or what impact do you want to make on the dance world or art world?
It's a big question.
The world with your art during your lifetime?
Would you be satisfied with I don't know? Like I said, the long-term goal, if I were to make such a bold statement, is to really put some effort into being a part of a team or part of a collaboration that really creates some sort of department of arts and culture within the government. That would be something I would throw my weight behind 100%. Just to have a place at the table. It wouldn't fix everything. It probably would complicate a whole bunch of people's lives. And that'll get worked out over the years. And again, there'll be pros and cons, and just like any system. But right now we don't really have a place at the table. We have some champions within the legislature and some in the federal government who love dance or who love the arts. But it's not consistent or sustainable in the ways that I think would really help out small startup, dance studios, all the way to multi-million-dollar dance companies with a tradition and lineage into years and years of fundamental movement-based arts. So to have a hand in that would be amazing. In the short term and midterm, it's really just becoming a better teacher and facilitating the kinds of conversations that I'd like artists to just have in their back pocket, so that when they're challenged by someone who literally does not understand why they do what they do, or wants to defund what they do, or completely considers what they do is irrelevant and unvaluable, I want those artists to have the capability in those moments to speak about them, about their craft, about their themselves, and to not shy away from those conversations. They're really difficult ones to have, but they need to be had. And the more that we can have them, I think the better off the arts will be in the long term. Very much think that the arts is a lifestyle. To be an artist is a lifestyle. To be creative is a lifestyle. And there are more people cut off from that creativity than we want to admit. And I don't agree with that. I think that a single mom raising 3 kids like my mom did, because my dad passed away when I was 7, is so creative and is so resilient. And she plays piano and, was able to like decompress and debrief by just playing this music and getting herself out of her brain, and to, and to be creative. And now, she's in her mid-60s, and she just, quit one job and became a hospice nurse and bought a new house. And like, she took a leap of a lifetime at 60. I think that's amazing. And I don't take any of the credit, because I think that she has been an amazing person in her own right. But I do have a suspicion that when I became an artist, and then she started seeing all the shows, every show, meeting other artists, having conversations with people about the work, and meeting creators and choreographers, and those creators and choreographers knowing her by name, and being in the mix of artists who are just reimagining reality all the time. I think that rubs off on people. And I think, her making a decision in her mid-60s completely transform her life and her reality. I would like to think that her rubbing up against artists allowed her to take on that challenge and make it make sense for her. And I think that's the impact. I think that's what it can have, and I think that's what it does have. And we don't always ascribe we don't ascribe it to the arts as being the motivator for things, but I do, because I'm biased, and I think it does. So, so yeah, I think that's the impact. I think liberating people from themselves, from the story of themselves that is not helpful or useful. And when we liberate people, they liberate others, and it just becomes a compounded movement of embodying creativity. And even going back to conservative leaning to left leaning, I value these kinds of conversations, because I consider both of you to be extremely embodied people, and you live in your life, if that makes sense. And to come across someone that lives in their life and isn't just regurgitating fun facts about conservatism, or regurgitating fun facts about progressive or left-leaning ideals. It's very different than like coming up to someone and actually encountering who they are, it's much harder to refute, and it's much harder to devalue. And I really appreciate that about the two of you. And I think it's because we're artists that we're able to do that. And I think that's the impact. I think that's where it starts. That's where healing and togetherness and connection and hopefully this podcast, you know, reverberates to other people that find it useful and changes their mind about strangers who could be friends, who are friends, but they just don't know it yet.
I love that.
That's beautiful.
Awesome. Man, this has been great.
It has been great. This has been really great.
Yeah, so yeah, let me just wrap it up. So again, everybody, Brian J. Evans, I'll put your Instagram down below in the description, so please go check him out. And
My Instagram is not kept up with, so
okay,
my website might be a better.
Okay,
yeah.
We'll put that down there. So
right
yeah, go check him out.
Sorry to cut you off.
No problem. He's obviously amazing. So thank you for being here today, and we'll talk shortly.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Bye.
See ya.